The alarm bell in the palace tower rang 3 times, and I knew that sound meant one thing. Someone wanted me moved, fast, and no one was going to tell me why. My name is Daniel Ashford, and for 3 years I had lived inside the Voss Empire's capital as what they called a guest. That word was a kind gift wrapped around a hard truth. I was a hostage, a translator, a leftover piece of a war that Earth had somehow won, though nobody on this planet liked to say that word out loud. 2 guards came for me, before I had even tied my boots. Their skin caught the light in shades of deep blue, their eyes narrow and quick, built for reading danger before it arrived. They did not speak. They simply pointed toward the corridor, and I understood that arguing would waste time I did not have. We moved through hallways carved from pale stone, past murals showing the Voss victories of centuries past, past silent servants who lowered their eyes when I walked by. 3 years, and they still could not decide if I was dangerous or pitiful. Most days, I could not decide either. I tried to keep my breathing steady. In this palace, fear had a smell, and the Voss could catch it from across a room. Whatever waited for me at the end of this corridor, I needed to walk in calm, or I would already have lost. The truth is, I had spent 3 years learning how not to be afraid, even when everything in me wanted to run. Fear got you killed here. Curiosity, sometimes, kept you alive. When the war ended, the treaty called for an exchange. Not soldiers, not prisoners exactly. A handful of humans stayed behind as living proof that peace could hold, walking reminders that neither side would break the fragile line drawn between 2 furious civilizations. I had been chosen because I spoke their language fluently, because I had studied it during the war to help intercept their messages, and because someone in my own government decided I was expendable enough to leave behind. I still remembered the shuttle door closing behind me on that first day, the hiss of pressurized air, the last sight of the human evacuation ship called the Horizon pulling away into the dark. I had told myself it was temporary. 3 years later, temporary had become simply my life. The guards led me past the outer ring of the palace, into territory I had never been allowed to enter. This was the inner court, the place where the royal bloodline lived, ate and slept, sealed away from anyone who was not Voss by blood. I felt the shift immediately. The air here was warmer, thick with a floral scent the Voss used to calm their nerves. The murals changed too. No more battle scenes. Instead, soft images of mothers holding children, painted in gentle blues and golds. This was the nursery wing. My stomach tightened. In 3 years, I had learned exactly one unbreakable rule about the Voss royal family. Their children were never, under any circumstance, shown to outsiders. Not diplomats, not translators, not even trusted advisors from allied worlds. The reason had never been explained to me directly, only whispered about by servants who assumed I could not understand their dialect well enough to follow. What I had gathered, piece by piece, was this. The Voss believed their infants were born with something no adult fully understood anymore, an instinct buried so deep in their blood that language could not touch it. A newborn Voss could sense danger before its mind had even learned to form thoughts. It was said that an infant's first reaction to a stranger revealed the truth about that stranger, a truth no words could hide. And no infant, in the entire recorded history of their empire, had ever reached toward someone who was not Voss. I did not know that fact meant anything as I walked forward, escorted by silent guards, toward a set of doors carved with the crest of the ruling house. I only knew that I had never once been allowed near this part of the palace, and now, without warning, I was standing right outside it. A woman met us at the entrance. She wore the deep violet robes of the royal household staff, her expression unreadable, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "You are the human translator," she said. It was not a question. "Daniel Ashford," I answered. "I was told to come. No one told me why." "The princess requested you." Her voice dropped lower, careful, like she was handling something fragile. "There is a ceremony today, The presentation of her child before the court. She insists on a human translator present to record the words spoken so there can be no dispute later about what was promised. That explanation made a strange kind of sense. Voss politics ran on precision. Every promise, every title, every drop of royal blood was documented with obsessive care, because power here shifted through bloodlines, not elections. If Princess Isvena wanted a neutral party recording her child's presentation, a human with no stake in Voss succession might actually be useful. Still, something about the tension in the woman's shoulders told me there was more to this than paperwork. Why me? I asked. There must be Voss scholars far more skilled at this than I am. She hesitated before answering. The princess asked for you by name. I do not question the princess. I did not push further. In this palace, questions could cost you far more than answers ever gave you back. The doors opened, and I stepped into the nursery wing for the first time. It was nothing like I expected. I had imagined cold stone and formal ceremony, but instead I found warmth, soft light filtering through high windows, walls painted with stars, and gentle shapes that Voss children apparently found soothing. A dozen attendants moved quietly around the room, adjusting cushions, arranging small woven baskets filled with items I did not recognize, likely gifts for the coming ceremony. At the center of it all stood Princess Isvena. I had seen her only twice before, both times from a careful distance during formal court gatherings. Up close, she looked younger than I expected, her deep blue skin marked with the pale silver lines that denoted royal blood among the Voss. She held something wrapped in soft cloth against her chest, rocking it gently, her eyes fixed downward with an expression I recognized instantly, though I had never expected to see it on a Voss face. It was the look of a mother who loved her child fiercely and feared for it just as fiercely. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment something passed across her face that I could not name, relief maybe, or resolve. "You came," she said, in careful, formal Voss. "I was told you requested me," I said, bowing my head slightly, the way protocol demanded. "I am here to serve as translator for the ceremony." "That is what they were told," she said quietly. "It is not entirely why I asked for you." Before I could ask what she meant, the doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and the sound of 100 voices rolled in like a wave. The court had arrived. Advisors in deep formal robes, generals with medals marking battles I remembered from the wrong side of the war, and at the very center of the procession, moving with the calm authority of absolute power, came Queen Thavella. I had only ever seen the queen from across a crowded hall. This close, her presence pressed down on the room like weather. Every servant froze. Every attendant lowered their eyes. Even Isvena straightened, her grip on the bundled child tightening just slightly. The queen's gaze swept the room once, cataloging everything before it landed on me. I felt it like a physical weight. "A human," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber despite its softness. "In the nursery wing." "My daughter requested him," came a voice from beside the queen, sharp and edged with suspicion. I recognized the speaker as Lord Caith, one of the queen's most trusted advisors, a man who had never once bothered to hide his distaste for the treaty that let humans like me remain on Voss soil. For the ceremony records, apparently. The queen studied me a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod, as if filing the matter away for later consideration. "Proceed," she said simply. The ceremony began, and I understood then that I had been given a role to play, small and technical, recording words that would matter to Voss law long after this day ended. I lifted the data slate the attendants handed me, ready to record the formal declarations that would follow, grateful, in a strange way, to have something to focus on besides the enormous weight of every eye in that room. I did not know, as I knelt slightly to receive the ceremonial slate from an attendant, passing close by Isvena and the small bundle in her arms, that the next few seconds would change everything I understood about my place in this empire, and about what the Voss truly believed humanity to be. The bundle in Isvena's arms shifted. I barely noticed it at first, too focused on balancing the slate and following the ceremonial words being read aloud by an official standing near the Queen's side. But then I felt it, a small motion at the edge of my vision, deliberate in a way that stopped my breath. A tiny hand had slipped free from the cloth wrapping, reaching outward, reaching toward me. I froze, uncertain what to do, aware suddenly that the room around me had gone utterly, completely silent. The silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like the entire chamber had stopped breathing at once. Every attendant, every advisor, every guard along the walls turned toward the small bundle in Isvena's arms, their expressions frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. I did not move. I did not know if moving would make things worse. The child's hand remained outstretched, tiny fingers opening and closing slowly, reaching not toward its mother, not toward the nearest attendant, but directly toward me. Its eyes, a pale shade of silver blue, focused on my face with an intensity that seemed impossible for something so small and so new to the world. Isvena went completely still. She looked down at her child, then up at me, and I saw something shift behind her eyes, something between fear and wonder. "Move away," Lord Caith said sharply, breaking the silence. His voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. "Get the human away from the child immediately." 2 guards stepped forward, their hands moving toward me, and my instincts screamed at me to back away, to apologize, to do anything that might calm the sudden storm building in the room. But before the guards could reach me, a single voice cut through everything else. "Wait!" It was the Queen. Every guard stopped mid-step. Every advisor turned toward her. Queen Thavella had not raised her voice, had barely raised her hand, yet the entire room obeyed instantly, as if her will alone held more authority than any command shouted at full volume. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed not on me, but on the child in her daughter's arms. Isvena, to her credit, did not pull the infant away or hide it from view. She simply stood there, watching her mother approach, her expression carefully guarded. "Show me," the Queen said quietly. Isvena hesitated only a moment before shifting the child slightly, allowing the small hand to remain visible, still reaching, still open, still fixed in my direction. The Queen studied the scene for a long moment. I had never felt more like an object under examination, a specimen pinned beneath glass, waiting to be understood or discarded. I kept my own hands carefully at my sides, resisting every urge to step back, to apologize, to do anything that might be read as aggression or deceit. "Do you know what you are witnessing?" the Queen asked, though I understood the question was not directed at me. It was directed at the room, at the advisors and generals and attendants who stood frozen along the walls. No one answered. No one dared to. "In 400 years of recorded history," the Queen continued, her voice calm, almost clinical, "no child of our bloodline has ever reached toward one who was not Voss. Not once. Not in war. Not in peace. Not toward allies we trusted with our lives, nor toward diplomats we welcomed as friends." She paused, and I felt every eye in the chamber shift toward me once more. Yet here, in this room, before the entire court, my granddaughter reaches toward a human. The word landed heavy in the silence that followed. I heard whispers ripple through the gathered nobles, quiet at first, then growing louder, a rising tide of confusion and unease. "It is an omen," someone murmured from near the back of the chamber. "A warning." "Or a mistake of nature," another voice added, sharper, more accusing. "The child is flawed. It cannot yet be trusted to sense danger properly." I saw Isvena's jaw tighten at that comment, her arms drawing the infant slightly closer to her chest, though she did not turn away from the Queen. "With respect, Your Majesty," Lord Caith said, stepping forward, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who had spent decades navigating court politics. "This cannot be allowed to stand unquestioned. The human should be removed from the nursery wing immediately, and the matter investigated by the council before rumors spread beyond these walls. Investigated, the Queen repeated slowly, as if testing the word. Yes, that seems wise. She turned to me then, and for the first time since I had entered the chamber, her full attention settled directly on my face. Her eyes were pale gold, ancient-looking, despite the smoothness of her skin, and I felt as though she were reading every thought I had ever had, cataloging them one by one. "Human," she said. "Daniel Ashford, that is your name, is it not?" "Yes, Your Majesty," I answered, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "Do you know why my granddaughter reached for you?" "No, Your Majesty, I do not." "Have you met this child before today?" "No, Your Majesty. This is the first time I have been permitted into the nursery wing." She studied me a moment longer, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing my answers, searching for any sign of deception. I forced myself to hold her gaze, though every instinct told me to look away, to submit, to make myself smaller and less threatening. "He speaks the truth," Isvena said quietly, drawing the Queen's attention back to her. "I only met him myself for the first time earlier today, when I requested his presence for the ceremony records. There has been no contact between them before this moment." The Queen turned back to the guards, still standing near me, their hands hovering uncertainly, waiting for a command that had not yet come. "Take him to the eastern chamber," she said finally. "Under guard, but with no harm done to him. I will question him myself once this ceremony has concluded." "Your Majesty," Lord Keith began, clearly intending to argue, but the Queen raised one hand, and he fell silent instantly. "The ceremony will continue," she said, her voice carrying the finality of absolute command. "We will not allow rumor and fear to disrupt centuries of tradition over a single unexplained moment. But make no mistake, this matter will be understood before the sun sets today." I felt the guards close in around me, their grips firm but not cruel, and I allowed myself to be led toward the chamber doors. As I turned to go, I caught one last glimpse of Isvena, still holding her child close, her eyes following me across the room with an expression I could not fully read. Curiosity, perhaps, or something closer to hope. The infant's small hand had finally curled back into the warmth of the cloth wrapping, but its eyes remained open, tracking my movement across the chamber until the doors closed between us. The eastern chamber was smaller than I expected, its walls bare of the murals and decorations found elsewhere in the palace. A single window looked out over the training grounds far below, where soldiers moved through drills in perfect unison, their formations sharp and precise even from this distance. The guards left me there without a word, though I noticed two remained stationed just outside the door, their silhouettes visible through the frosted glass panel set into the frame. I sat down on the single bench provided, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. 3 years I had spent in this palace, careful never to draw attention, never to give anyone a reason to question whether the treaty allowing my presence here had been a mistake. And now, in the span of a few seconds, I had become the center of a crisis I did not fully understand. I thought back over everything I had learned about Voss beliefs regarding their children, piecing together fragments of conversations overheard from servants, comments from advisors who had assumed I understood less of their language than I actually did. The Voss believed their infants possessed an instinct older than language itself, something encoded deep within their blood that allowed them to sense danger before conscious thought could even form. It was said that this instinct never failed, that it represented the purest form of truth available to their species, untainted by politics or deception or the careful masks that adults learn to wear. If that belief held true, then what had just happened in that nursery meant one of two things. Either everything the Voss believed about their own instincts was wrong, built on centuries of assumption rather than fact, or there was something about me, something about humanity itself, that did not match the danger their instincts were built to detect. Neither possibility seemed likely to end well for me. I waited in that chamber for what felt like hours, though the shifting light through the window suggested it had only been perhaps 90 minutes. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, the small hand reaching outward, the silence that followed, the fear and confusion rippling through a room full of people who had spent their entire lives believing certain truths about the universe and their place within it. When the door finally opened, it was not a guard who entered, but Isvena herself, dressed now in simpler robes, the ceremonial finery of earlier replaced with something more practical. She closed the door behind her carefully before turning to face me. "You must have many questions," she said quietly. "I have exactly one question," I said. "What did I do wrong?" Her expression softened slightly, something almost like sympathy crossing her features. "You did nothing wrong, Daniel Ashford. That is precisely the problem." She moved further into the room, taking a seat across from me, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Up close, without the weight of ceremony pressing down on her, she looked younger than I had first assumed, tired, in a way that went beyond simple exhaustion. "My daughter is 3 weeks old," she said. "In 3 weeks, she has been shown to exactly 11 people, all of them Voss, all of them family or trusted attendants who have served this household for decades. Today was meant to be her formal introduction to the wider court, a ceremony repeated for every royal child for as long as records exist. And I was never supposed to be part of that," I said. "You were supposed to record the words spoken, nothing more. I requested you specifically because I trusted you would document things accurately, without political motive clouding your account. I did not expect what happened next any more than you did. The Queen believes something significant happened," I said. The way she spoke, the way the entire court reacted, this was not a small thing. Isvena was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I could not fully read. "Do you know what we believe about our children, Daniel Ashford? I have heard fragments," I admitted, "that your infants can sense danger before they understand anything else about the world, that this instinct has never been wrong. It is more than belief," she said. "It is the foundation of how we understand truth itself. Adults can lie. Adults can perform kindness while hiding cruelty, or perform loyalty while planning betrayal. But an infant, before language, before reason, before any capacity for deception has developed, an infant simply reacts to what it senses. Fear withdraws it. Safety draws it forward. This is held true for every recorded generation of our species." "Until today," I said quietly. "Until today," she agreed. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching my face as though looking for an answer written somewhere in my features. "My mother believes this moment must be understood, examined, explained. She fears what it might mean if left unexplained, that other members of the court might use fear and rumor to turn this into something dangerous, a crack in the foundation of everything we believe about ourselves. But I confess, Daniel Ashford, I am less afraid of the unexplained than she is." "Why is that?" "Because when my daughter reached for you, she was not afraid," Isvena said. "She was curious. There is a difference, and I do not think my mother, or the rest of the court, has considered that difference carefully enough." Before I could respond, the door opened again, and this time it was the Queen herself who entered, flanked by 2 guards who took up positions just inside the doorway. Isvena rose immediately, bowing her head in respect, and I stood as well, uncertain of the proper protocol for whatever was about to happen next. "Leave us," the Queen said to the guards, and they withdrew without hesitation, closing the door behind them. She studied her daughter for a moment, something passing silently between them that I could not interpret, before turning her full attention toward me. "Sit," she said. "We have much to discuss, human, and very little time before the court demands answers I am not yet prepared to give them." I sat, and the Queen took the seat across from me, her posture perfectly composed despite the storm I imagined must be raging behind her calm expression. Isvena remained standing near the window, her arms crossed, watching the exchange with careful attention. "I have ruled this empire for 31 years, the Queen began. "In that time, I have faced rebellion, famine, and war. I have made decisions that cost thousands of lives, and decisions that saved just as many. I tell you this so you understand that I do not frighten easily, Daniel Ashford. Yet what happened in that nursery today has unsettled me more than any battlefield ever has." "I understand this must be difficult to accept," I said carefully. "But I promise you, Your Majesty, I did nothing to influence what happened. I did not even know the belief existed until Princess Isvena explained it to me moments ago." "I believe you," the Queen said, which surprised me enough that I nearly missed her next words. "That is precisely what troubles me. If you had done something, some trick, some deception, I could dismiss this as manipulation and have you removed from my empire within the hour. But you did nothing. My granddaughter reached for you unprompted, unguided, following an instinct that has never once failed in 400 years of recorded history." She leaned forward slightly, her pale gold eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me want to look away, though I forced myself to hold her gaze. "So tell me," she said, "what are you, human, that a Voss child would sense no danger in you?" I did not have an easy answer. I sat there for a long moment, searching for words that might satisfy a question I barely understood myself. "I do not know how to answer that in a way that will make sense within your beliefs," I said finally. "But I can tell you what I know about myself, and perhaps about my species, and you can judge whether it offers any explanation." "Speak," she said. I took a breath, trying to organize 3 years of careful observation and a lifetime of experience into something coherent. "Humans are not a gentle species, Your Majesty. I know this better than most, having lived through the war between our peoples. We are capable of tremendous violence when threatened, capable of building weapons that can end entire cities in moments. Your own advisors have called us monsters more than once in my presence, and I understand why. Yet that same capacity for violence exists alongside something else, something we rarely explain well, even to ourselves. Humans protect what they consider vulnerable, often at great cost to themselves, often without any benefit to gain from it. We build shelters for children who are not our own blood. We risk our lives for strangers we will never see again. This instinct exists alongside our capacity for war, not separate from it." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, considering this. "Give me an example," she said. "Not a philosophy, a memory, something real." I thought back through the years, searching for a moment that might translate across the gap between our species. During the war, before I came here, I served as a translator aboard a research vessel that studied intercepted Voss communications. We were attacked once, our engines damaged, and the ship began venting atmosphere from a breach near the lower decks. There was a technician working in that section, a young woman I barely knew, trapped behind a jammed door as the air pressure dropped. Isvena had turned from the window now, listening closely. I was not required to help her. My duties involved translation, nothing more. But 3 of us broke protocol and worked to force that door open, knowing the section might already be too damaged to save her, knowing we were risking our own safety by remaining in a compromised part of the ship. We got her out. She survived. None of us received recognition for it beyond a brief mention in the official report. We did not do it for reward. We did it because leaving her there was not something any of us could accept. "This is common among your species," the Queen said. It was not quite a question. "It is not universal," I admitted. "Some humans are cruel, selfish, capable of terrible things, but the instinct to protect the vulnerable, even strangers, even at personal cost, runs deep enough in most of us that we build entire institutions around it. We have places built specifically to care for children who have lost their families, staffed by people with no blood relation to those children at all, funded by strangers who will never meet the ones they help." The Queen exchanged a glance with her daughter, something passing between them that I could not fully interpret. "This is difficult for us to understand," the Queen said finally. "Among the Voss, protection of the vulnerable exists, but it exists within careful boundaries. Family protects family. Bloodline protects bloodline. The isolation of our young, the practice you witness today, exists precisely because we do not extend that protective instinct easily, beyond those boundaries. An outsider is, by definition, someone whose intentions cannot be verified, and therefore someone from whom our children must be shielded until they are old enough to make judgments of their own. And yet your granddaughter reached for me anyway, I said quietly. Yes, the Queen said. That is the problem I must solve. She rose from her seat, moving toward the window where Isvena stood, looking out over the training grounds below, in silence for a long moment, before speaking again. There are those in my court who will call this a corruption of the bloodline, she said. Lord Caith already believes it, though he has not yet said so directly in my presence. He will argue that something is wrong with my granddaughter, that her instincts are flawed, damaged somehow, and that this flaw must be addressed before it threatens the stability of the succession. That is not true, Isvena said sharply, the first real emotion I had heard in her voice since the Queen arrived. There is nothing wrong with my daughter. I did not say I believed it, the Queen replied calmly. I said there are those who will argue it. And there are others, quieter, more dangerous, who will whisper that this is an omen, a sign that the treaty with the humans was a mistake from the beginning, that allowing them to remain among us has already begun to corrupt something essential about who we are. I felt a chill at those words, understanding suddenly that my presence in this room was not simply about answering questions. It was about survival, mine and possibly Isvena's daughter as well. What do you believe, Your Majesty? I asked, though I was not certain I wanted the answer. The Queen turned back to face me, and for the first time since she had entered the chamber, I saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the careful composure she had maintained throughout our conversation. I believe, she said slowly, that for 400 years we have told ourselves a story about what danger looks like. I believe that story has never once been questioned, because it has never once needed to be questioned. And I believe that today, for the first time in our recorded history, that story has been proven incomplete. Incomplete, I repeated, not wrong. Perhaps both, she said. Our instincts are not wrong, Daniel Ashford. My granddaughter sensed something true when she reached for you, but our understanding of what that instinct means, what danger truly looks like, that may need to be examined more carefully than any of us are comfortable admitting. She returned to her seat, folding her hands carefully in her lap, and I recognized in that gesture the same careful composure I imagined she used when negotiating treaties, when facing down rebellious generals, when making decisions that shaped the fate of her entire empire. I will not execute you, she said, her voice matter-of-fact, as though discussing something as simple as the weather, though I suspect that possibility has crossed your mind more than once since this morning. It has, I admitted. Nor will I exile you, though the Council will likely push for exactly that outcome once word of today's events spreads beyond these walls, which it will, regardless of any effort I make to contain it. Word always spreads in this palace. I have learned to stop fighting that particular truth. Then what will you do, Your Majesty? I will study you, she said simply. You, and whatever it is about your species that allows this contradiction to exist, violence and gentleness sharing the same blood, the same instinct, without one canceling the other out. You will remain in the palace, under careful watch, and you will answer my questions honestly, as you have done today. In exchange, I will protect you from those in my court who would prefer a simpler explanation. I understood the weight of what she was offering, and the danger hidden within it as well. I would be safe from execution, safe from exile, but I would also become the center of an investigation that could last months, perhaps years, my every word and action examined for clues about a mystery I did not fully understand myself. And the ceremony? I asked. What happens now, with the court expecting answers you have not yet given them? The ceremony will be declared complete, the Queen said. My granddaughter has been formally presented, regardless of the unusual circumstances surrounding that presentation. As for the reason behind those circumstances, I will tell the court that the matter is under investigation, and that speculation before conclusions are reached serves no one. They will not be satisfied with that answer, Isvena said quietly. No, the queen agreed, they will not. But it will hold, for now, and now is all we have time to secure. She rose again, this time moving toward the door, pausing only briefly to look back at me one final time. You will be given quarters within the inner court, Daniel Ashford, closer than you have ever been permitted before. Guards will accompany you at all times, not as prisoners guard the condemned, but as protection, both for you and for the stability of my empire. Do you understand the difference? I believe so, Your Majesty. Good. Then let us begin understanding this contradiction together, before others decide to understand it for us, in ways far less patient than my own. She left the chamber without another word, and I sat there in silence for a long moment, processing everything that had just happened. Isvena remained by the window, watching me with an expression that had softened somewhat since her mother's departure. You should know, she said quietly, that not everyone in this court will accept my mother's judgment easily. Lord Kayeth has influence, allies among the older generals who fought in the war and have never fully released their hatred of humanity. They will look for opportunities to prove your presence here is dangerous, regardless of what my mother decides. Why are you telling me this? Because you protected a stranger once, at risk to yourself, expecting nothing in return, she said. You told my mother that story to help her understand your species. I am telling you this so you understand mine, so you can protect yourself in the days ahead. I studied her for a moment, searching for some hidden motive behind the warning, but found only what appeared to be genuine concern. Thank you, I said finally, for requesting me today, for trusting me with your daughter, even though you did not fully understand what would happen. I did not choose this outcome, she said, but I do not regret it either. My daughter looked at you and saw no danger. That is not something I am prepared to dismiss, no matter how many voices in this court demand that I should. She moved toward the door, pausing only briefly before leaving. Rest, if you can. Tomorrow, my mother will likely have many more questions, and I suspect the days that follow will not grow easier for either of us. She left, and I remained alone in that small chamber, staring out the window at the training grounds below, where soldiers continued their drills in perfect, unquestioning unison, oblivious to the crack that had just formed in centuries of certainty above them. I did not sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the small hand reaching outward, the silence that followed, the weight of 100 eyes fixed on me in a room built entirely around the assumption that I did not belong there. I understood, lying awake in unfamiliar quarters within the inner court, that whatever came next would shape not only my own fate, but perhaps something larger, something neither the queen nor I fully understood yet. A single reach, a single moment of infant curiosity, had cracked open a question that 400 years of Voss history had never once needed to ask. What did danger truly look like, and had they been wrong about it all along? I did not know the answer, but I suspected, somehow, that I was about to find out, whether I was ready or not. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm I could never have predicted. Each morning, guards escorted me from my new quarters in the inner court to a private study where Queen Thavella waited, along with a small team of scholars who recorded everything discussed between us. She asked me questions that ranged from simple curiosity to deep philosophical inquiry, and I answered as honestly as I could, aware that my words were shaping her understanding of my entire species. Explain to me, she said one morning, roughly 2 weeks after the ceremony, how a species capable of building weapons that destroy entire cities can also build shelters for orphan children. I am not certain I can explain it fully, I admitted. Even among humans, this contradiction is debated endlessly. But I believe both instincts come from the same place. We protect what we love fiercely, and when something threatens what we love, that same fierce protection becomes something that looks like violence from the outside. So the violence is not separate from the gentleness. she said slowly, working through the idea aloud. It is the same instinct, simply pointed in different directions depending on the threat. I believe so, Your Majesty. A parent who would give their life to protect their child is not so different from a soldier who fights to protect their homeland. The love comes first. The violence, when it happens, is a consequence of that love being threatened. She was quiet for a long moment, turning this idea over carefully. Among the Voss, we separate these instincts entirely. Warriors are trained from childhood to set aside gentleness, to view it as a weakness that clouds judgment in battle. Caregivers are never expected to fight. We believe the two cannot coexist within the same being without one corrupting the other. Perhaps that belief has served you well for centuries, I said carefully, but I do not think it explains what happened in the nursery. Your granddaughter did not sense the absence of danger in me. She sensed something more complicated, a danger that exists alongside gentleness, rather than instead of it. The Queen studied me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her pale gold eyes. You may be right, she said finally, and that possibility frightens me more than any enemy I have faced on the battlefield. Our conversations continued in this manner for days, each one peeling back another layer of assumption the Voss had built their entire civilization upon. I came to respect the Queen's mind during those sessions, her willingness to question centuries of certainty even when the answers unsettled her deeply. She was not cruel, as I had once assumed. She was careful, methodical, and above all, responsible for an empire that depended on her judgment being sound. Outside those private sessions, my relationship with Isvena grew as well, though in a very different way. She began seeking me out during quiet hours, bringing her daughter with her, testing something neither of us spoke about directly, but both understood clearly. You do not have to do this, I told her one afternoon, as she settled into a chair across from me in the small garden attached to my quarters, her daughter resting quietly in her arms. If word spreads that you are deliberately testing whether the first reach was accident or instinct, it will only give Lord Keith more reason to argue against me. Let him argue, Isvena said, though I noticed a flicker of worry cross her features despite her confident words. I am not doing this for him. I am doing this because I need to understand my own daughter, and I trust my own eyes more than I trust rumors whispered through palace corridors. She shifted the child slightly, allowing her small face to turn toward me, those same pale silver-blue eyes studying me with the same open curiosity I remembered from the ceremony weeks before. Would you like to hold her? Isvena asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Are you certain that is wise? I am certain of very little these days, she admitted, but I would like to know. I reached out carefully, and Isvena placed her daughter gently into my arms, showing me exactly how to support her small head, her weight settling against me with a trust that felt both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. The infant looked up at my face, studying me with the same unblinking attention I remembered, and then, slowly, one small hand reached upward, fingers brushing against my own with unmistakable deliberate intent. Isvena let out a breath she had clearly been holding, something between relief and quiet awe crossing her expression. It was not an accident, she said softly. No, I agreed, watching the small fingers curl gently around one of mine. I do not believe it was. We sat together in that garden for a long while, saying little, simply allowing the moment to settle between us. I understood, even then, that we had crossed some invisible threshold, moving from cautious cooperation into something closer to genuine trust. I did not know yet how dangerous that trust would prove to be for people who preferred the world to remain exactly as it had always been. Word did spread, as Isvena had predicted it would. Servants whispered about it in corridors. Advisors debated it in closed council chambers. And somewhere among those whispers and debates, Lord Keith found the opening he had been waiting for since the day of the ceremony. I learned of the danger only hours before it arrived, and even then, not directly. A young servant named Bethany, one of the few human staff members permitted to work within the palace, found me in the garden late one evening. her expression tight with worry. "You need to be careful," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder as though checking for anyone who might overhear. I heard two of the guards talking. Lord Caeth has been meeting privately with several of the older generals, men who lost family during the war. They believe the princess's child has been corrupted somehow, and they believe removing the source of that corruption will restore things to how they were. "Removing the source," I repeated slowly. "They mean me." "I do not know for certain," Bethany admitted, "but I thought you should know. Please, be careful." She left quickly, clearly nervous about even having shared that much, and I sat alone in the darkening garden, turning her warning over in my mind. If Lord Caeth believed removing me would resolve the crisis he saw building within the court, there was no guarantee he would limit his actions to simply having me exiled or dismissed. Desperate men convinced of their own righteousness had done far worse things throughout history, on every world I had ever heard of. I considered warning Isvena immediately, but something held me back, some instinct telling me that whatever came next would arrive regardless of preparation, and that the true danger might not be aimed at me at all. I was right to worry, though not in the way I expected. 2 days later, I was summoned to the royal gardens for what I believed would be another quiet afternoon with Isvena and her daughter. The gardens themselves stretched across a wide section of the inner court, filled with tall flowering plants native to the Voss homeworld, their petals a deep shade of violet that seemed to glow faintly in direct sunlight. Isvena was already there when I arrived, her daughter resting in a woven basket beside her as she reviewed documents related to court business. Several attendants moved through the garden at a respectful distance, and 2 guards stood watch near the entrance, their postures relaxed in a way that suggested nothing unusual was expected that day. I settled into a chair near Isvena, and we spoke quietly about small matters, the weather, the progress of my sessions with the Queen, nothing that would have suggested danger lurking anywhere nearby. The infant slept peacefully in her basket, occasionally stirring but never fully waking. It happened faster than I could process at the time, though I have replayed the moment countless times since. A servant approached from the far side of the garden, carrying what appeared to be a tray of refreshments, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone performing a routine task. Neither the guards nor Isvena paid him any particular attention, one servant among dozens who moved through the palace grounds each day. I noticed something wrong only a moment before it happened, some small detail my mind registered without fully understanding why it mattered. The way the servant's hand trembled slightly as he set the tray down, the way his eyes flicked toward the sleeping infant with an intensity that did not match his casual posture. I moved before I had consciously decided to move, some instinct older than thought propelling me forward, my body already crossing the distance between my chair and the basket where the child slept. The servant's hand moved toward the tray, toward something hidden beneath the arranged refreshments, and I did not wait to understand exactly what that object was. I simply reached the basket first, sweeping the child up into my arms and turning my body between her and the approaching threat, my back absorbing whatever came next, rather than allowing it to reach her. The device the servant had concealed released a burst of energy that struck my shoulder with force enough to knock me forward, pain flaring bright and immediate along my arm, but I kept my grip on the child steady, curling my body around her small form even as I stumbled toward the ground. The garden erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, rushing forward from every direction. Isvena screamed something I could not fully process through the ringing in my ears, and somewhere beyond the immediate confusion, I heard the sound of the servant being tackled to the ground, his concealed device wrestled away by guards who had reacted the moment the threat became clear. I remained curled around the child, my shoulder burning with pain, until I felt hands gently pulling me upright, Isvena's voice finally breaking through the ringing in my ears. "Daniel, Daniel, look at me. Is she hurt? Is my daughter hurt?" I looked down, my arms still wrapped protectively around the small bundle, and found the infant looking back up at me, her expression more curious than frightened, entirely unharmed by whatever had just happened around her. "She is fine," I managed, my voice rough. "She is fine, Isvena. I have her." Relief flooded across Isvena's face as she carefully lifted her daughter from my arms, checking her over with the frantic thoroughness of a mother who had come far too close to losing everything in a single moment. Only once she was satisfied, her daughter remained unharmed, did she turn her attention toward me, her expression shifting from relief to horror as she registered the injury along my shoulder. "You are hurt," she said. "You threw yourself in front of that weapon without hesitation." "I did not think about it," I admitted, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind only pain and exhaustion in its place. I only knew I needed to reach her before whatever he intended could happen. Guards had already restrained the servant, and I caught a glimpse of his face as they dragged him away, twisted with something between fear and fanatical certainty, the expression of a man who believed, right up until the moment of his capture, that he was doing something necessary and righteous. Word of what happened spread through the palace faster than anything I had witnessed during my 3 years there. By the time healers arrived to treat my shoulder, guards had already begun questioning the captured servant, and I understood, even through the haze of pain and exhaustion, that whatever this moment revealed would matter far beyond the simple fact of an assassination attempt foiled. The entire court had spent weeks debating whether a single reach from an infant meant anything at all. Now they would have to reckon with something far more difficult to dismiss. A human who had thrown himself between danger and a child that was not his own, without hesitation, without calculation, in a manner that Voss instinct itself had apparently recognized as safe weeks before anyone else had been willing to believe it. The healers worked on my shoulder for nearly an hour, applying salves and instruments unfamiliar to me, though effective enough that the burning pain gradually faded into a dull, manageable ache. Throughout the treatment, guards remained stationed at every entrance to the medical chamber, and I understood that whatever calm the palace had maintained before that afternoon had shattered completely. Queen Thavella arrived just as the healers finished their work, her expression harder than I had ever seen it, carved from something that looked very much like controlled fury. "Tell me what happened," she said, standing over me with an intensity that made the healers quickly excuse themselves from the room. I recounted the events as clearly as I could, the servant's trembling hands, the way his eyes had flicked toward the sleeping child, the instinct that had propelled me forward before conscious thought had fully caught up with my actions. The queen listened without interruption, her jaw tightening further with each detail. "The servant has been questioned," she said once I finished. "He was not acting alone. Lord Keith arranged this, believing that removing you would resolve what he saw as a corruption threatening the bloodline. He convinced this man, a servant who lost 2 brothers during the war with your people, that eliminating you would restore proper order to the succession." "And the child?" I asked carefully. "Was she truly the intended target, or was I?" "Both," the queen said grimly. "Lord Keith's plan was designed to remove you entirely from the equation, and if my granddaughter suffered harm in the process, he had convinced himself that outcome would serve as further proof that something had gone wrong within her, a tragic but necessary consequence of correcting an unnatural situation." The coldness of that calculation settled heavily over the room. I had understood, in an abstract way, that my presence in the palace carried political risk, but hearing it stated so plainly, that a member of the highest court had been willing to risk an infant's safety to prove a point about ideology, left me struggling to find words. "What will happen to him?" I asked finally. "Lord Keith. He will face judgment before the full council," the queen said, "and I intend to ensure that judgment happens publicly, where every member of my court can witness exactly what his fear and prejudice nearly cost us." She paused, studying me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something that looked almost like gratitude, though carefully guarded beneath her usual composed authority. "You saved my granddaughter's life today, Daniel Ashford, at considerable risk to your own. I will not forget that, and I do not intend to allow my court to forget it either." 3 days later, the full council gathered in the great hall of the palace, a chamber I had only ever seen from a careful distance during formal ceremonies. This time, I stood near the front of the assembly, my shoulders still wrapped beneath my formal clothing, watching as Lord Caeth was brought before the Queen to answer for what he had arranged. The hall itself stretched impossibly high overhead, its ceiling painted with scenes depicting the founding of the Voss Empire centuries before, generations of rulers who had shaped the beliefs and traditions that had governed this civilization ever since. I found myself wondering, standing beneath those painted images, how many of those ancient certainties had gone unquestioned simply because no one had ever been given reason to question them. Lord Caeth stood before the assembled council with his head held high, defiant even in the face of clear evidence against him. The servant who had carried out the attack had already confessed everything, naming Caeth as the one who provided both the weapon and the justification for using it. "I acted to protect this empire," Caeth declared, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "For 400 years, we have trusted the instincts of our children above all else, because that trust has never once failed us. When that trust appeared broken, I believed it was my duty to correct the error, regardless of the cost required to do so. And if that cost had included the death of an infant heir," the Queen said, her voice cutting through the hall like cold steel, "would you still call your actions duty, Lord Caeth?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the first crack in his certainty. "I did not believe it would come to that," he said finally. "The servant was meant to remove only the human." "Yet you knew the child rested beside him," the Queen said. "You knew the risk, and you accepted it anyway, believing your judgment about what constituted proper order was worth more than the life of my granddaughter." Silence stretched through the hall, broken only by the quiet murmur of advisors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. 400 years, the Queen continued, turning now to address the entire assembled court rather than Lord Caeth alone. "We have told ourselves a story about danger, about instinct, about what our children can and cannot sense correctly. We have never once questioned that story, because we have never had reason to question it. Until 3 weeks ago, when my granddaughter reached toward a human she had never met, and every certainty we held about the nature of danger was called into question." She paused, letting her words settle over the silent hall. "Many of you whispered that something was wrong with my granddaughter. Others whispered that the treaty allowing humans to remain among us had already begun corrupting something essential about our civilization. Lord Caeth believed those whispers strongly enough that he was willing to risk the life of an infant heir to silence what he saw as a dangerous anomaly." She turned back toward Lord Caeth, her expression unreadable. "But 3 days ago, that same human threw himself between danger and my granddaughter without a moment's hesitation, absorbing harm meant for her, expecting nothing in return beyond her safety. He did this not because of blood, not because of duty owed through bloodline or treaty, but because some instinct within him recognized her as vulnerable and worth protecting, regardless of species, regardless of politics, regardless of every reason that might have justified standing aside instead. I felt every eye in the hall shift toward me, and I forced myself to remain still, to hold myself with whatever dignity I could manage under the weight of that collective attention. My granddaughter's instinct was not flawed, the Queen continued, her voice growing stronger, more certain with each word. It was accurate in a way none of us understood, because we had built our entire understanding of danger around a story too simple to capture the full truth of what danger actually means. We believed gentleness and violence could not exist within the same being without one corrupting the other. We were wrong. She gestured toward me, and I felt the weight of that gesture settle over my shoulders like a physical thing. This human is capable of violence. I have studied his species' history extensively these past weeks, and I do not doubt that capability for a moment. Yet that same capability exists alongside an instinct to protect the vulnerable that runs as deep, perhaps deeper, than anything within our own culture. My granddaughter did not sense the absence of danger in him. She sensed something more complicated, a fierce protectiveness that exists precisely because it can become violence when the vulnerable are threatened, rather than despite that fact. The hall remained silent, absorbing words that challenged 400 years of certainty in the span of a few sentences. Lord Keith acted out of fear, the Queen said finally, turning back toward him. Fear of a truth he was not prepared to accept. That fear led him to risk the very life he claimed to be protecting. For this, he will be stripped of his council position and his lands, and he will spend the remainder of his years in quiet reflection, far from the halls of power he so badly misused. Guards moved forward to escort Lord Keith from the hall, his defiant posture finally crumbling as the reality of his judgment settled over him. I felt no satisfaction watching him led away, only a quiet, exhausted relief that the danger he represented had finally been addressed. The Queen turned back toward the assembled council, her expression softening slightly as she continued. I have spent these past weeks studying this human, searching for an explanation that would satisfy centuries of tradition without requiring us to question the foundations of everything we believe about ourselves. I have found no such explanation. What I have found instead is a truth that I believe will serve this empire far better than the comfortable certainty we held before. She gestured for Isvena to step forward, her daughter held carefully in her arms, awake now and looking around the great hall with the same open curiosity I had come to recognize so well. Danger is not the absence of gentleness, the Queen said, addressing the full court now. And gentleness is not the absence of danger. The two exist together within the same being, the same species, perhaps within the same instinct that has always guided our children's earliest judgments. We have simply never before encountered a being whose fierce capacity for violence existed so completely alongside an equally fierce capacity for selfless protection, and so we assumed the two could not coexist. She looked toward me, and something in her expression carried an invitation I understood immediately. Come forward, Daniel Ashford. I moved through the parted crowd, aware of every eye tracking my progress toward the front of the hall, until I stood beside Isvena and her daughter, close enough that the infant's attention shifted immediately toward my face, her small hand already beginning to reach outward once more. This time, no one moved to stop it. This time, the entire hall watched in silence as the small hand found mine, fingers curling gently around my own with the same deliberate trust I remembered from our first meeting in the garden weeks before. Let this moment be recorded clearly, the Queen said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Not as an omen, not as a corruption of the bloodline, but as a truth our instincts recognized long before our minds were willing to accept it. This human, and by extension his species, poses no danger to the vulnerable among us. If anything, they may understand the protection of the vulnerable more deeply than we have ever fully appreciated ourselves. I felt the small hand tighten around my finger, and looking down into those pale silver blue eyes, I found myself thinking of everything that had led to this moment. The war that had brought me to this world in the first place, the fear and suspicion that had colored every interaction during my first 3 years here, and the single, unexpected reach that had cracked open centuries of certainty in the span of a heartbeat. Around the hall, I watched as advisors and generals, the same court that had once looked at me with barely concealed contempt, began lowering themselves, not in the deep formal bow reserved for royalty, but in something quieter, more personal, an acknowledgement that something fundamental about their understanding of the universe had shifted, and that shift deserved recognition rather than resistance. Isvena caught my eye across the small distance between us, and I saw in her expression something that had grown steadily over the weeks since that first ceremony, not merely gratitude or curiosity, but genuine trust, the kind that could only exist between people who had faced real danger together and emerged from it with their understanding of each other deepened rather than diminished. The queen studied the scene for a long moment before speaking again, her voice softer now, carrying less the weight of formal proclamation and more the quiet reflection of someone who had genuinely reconsidered something she had believed her entire life. "For 400 years, we feared what we did not understand about your people," she said, addressing me directly now, though her words clearly carried meaning for the entire court listening around us. "We built walls, treaties, careful distances designed to protect ourselves from a danger we believed was absolute, uncomplicated by anything resembling the gentleness we valued in ourselves. We were wrong to believe danger and gentleness could not share the same heart. Perhaps we were wrong about many things regarding your people, things this court will need considerable time to properly reconsider." She paused, looking down at her granddaughter, still holding my finger with quiet, unshakable trust. "But I believe now that the thing we feared most about humanity was never truly separate from the thing that makes your species worth knowing. The same fierce heart that builds weapons capable of ending cities is the same heart that throws itself between danger and a stranger's child without a moment's hesitation. Perhaps that is not a contradiction to fear, but a truth worth understanding more deeply, for both our peoples, in the years ahead." I did not have a formal response prepared for a moment like this, standing before an entire court that had spent weeks debating whether my presence represented salvation or corruption. I only had the truth of what I had felt in that garden, the instinct that had moved me before conscious thought could catch up, the same instinct, perhaps, that had guided countless humans throughout history to protect strangers at the cost of their own safety. "Where I come from," I said finally, my voice carrying quietly across the silent hall, "we do not always understand our own contradictions either. We fight wars and build shelters. We create weapons and raise children who are not our own blood, as though they were. I do not know if that makes us dangerous or gentle. Perhaps, as you say, it makes us both, inseparably, in ways neither of our peoples fully understood, until a child too young to lie reached out and told us the truth before any of us were ready to hear it." The queen studied me a long moment, then nodded slowly, something that looked almost like respect settling into her expression. "Then let us begin understanding that truth together," she said, rather than fearing it apart. The great hall remained silent a moment longer, centuries of certainty settling into something new, something none of us fully understood yet, but which felt, standing there with a small hand wrapped trustingly around my finger, like the beginning of something worth building carefully, rather than something to be feared and pushed away. Looking back now, months removed from that afternoon in the great hall, I understand that the thing which nearly ended my presence on that world was the very same thing that ultimately secured my place within it. An infant too young to understand politics, too young to weigh treaties, or fear, or centuries of careful tradition, looked at a stranger from a species her people had been taught to fear above all others, and reached toward him without hesitation. It took an assassination attempt, a public trial, and a queen willing to question 400 years of certainty before the rest of her court could see what that child had understood instantly. Sometimes the truth arrives quietly, in the smallest gesture imaginable, long before the world is ready to accept it. And sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to finally listen.